Well, as part of the Acme Game Masters event happening in Melbourne, it is my absolute pleasure to be interviewing Warren Spector. Warren, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
Now, I thought I'd ask a few kind of primer questions. For those at home who haven't seen it, how did you get your start in gaming?
It was pure luck. I was a gamer. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, 6, 7 days a week with my friends, and found myself out of work. I was teaching at a university, and they took my class away so some other graduate student could learn to teach too. And I got a call out of the blue from a gaming friend of mine saying, "Hey, you want a minimum wage job making games?" And I went, "Yes."
Well, they're very simple, very easy. How do you get your inspiration for the games you make?
The inspiration comes from everywhere. You try to do something more than just play games all the time. So you have some real world stuff to draw from. But really for me, the specific answer to that is I play a lot of games. I get frustrated with a lot of games, and that frustration leads me to want to do something different and better.
Well, events, you're obviously for the Game Masters. Events like Game Masters, how important are they for, I guess, gaming in the larger kind of social consciousness, if you will?
I've been making games for 30 years now, and I've been waiting for the world to catch up and figure out how cool we are, And events like the Game Master show at Acme are, I think, the best reflection of how much a part of sort of world culture, if I can get highfalutin for a minute.
Yeah.
We are a part of world culture now. We are an established art form, and we're not going anywhere.
What would you say is the most important part of making games?
Wow, the most important part of making games. I guess it's feeling like you've got something to say and then getting out of the way so players actually can participate in the saying of it. I don't know. Really just having something unique to bring to the table.
And any advice for anybody out there looking to make games?
Well, make sure you really want to make them, because you'll find you play a lot less when you're doing it professionally than when it's just your passion. And then know who you are and what you want to be. I mean, if you're a programmer, make sure you're the best programmer you can be. And if you're a designer, make sure you know what you stand for design-wise. I mean, know yourself. Make sure you really, really want to turn your passion into your profession.
Well, now, we'll step obviously into the little bit more in-depth questions. I mean, despite the obvious graphical and oral improvements in gaming technology, do you believe that this new technology actually improves game making in any significant way?
I've never felt like game design and the quality of games was driven by technology. I mean, obviously, graphical capabilities have improved so much that we can make our games look more realistic or just more beautiful if we're making a non-realistic game. That's all the good. But the real challenge of design is up here. It's in the creativity that you bring to it. We were doing some amazing things, when we had 16 colors to play with, and all we could do was beep, boop, boop, beep, that kind of stuff. And if you go to the Acme exhibit, I guarantee that you're not going to be standing there playing Ultima Underworld or Secret of Monkey Island for 5 hours, but you very well might stand there and play Robotron or Reactor, a game I'd never heard of, but it's at the show. You'll find yourself playing those, and those weren't exactly high-tech extravaganzas,
I must say, playing the old asteroids on the old CRT was just the way the vivid nature of the lights was something to behold. Look, going back into your past, having worked at Steve Jackson Games, who are responsible obviously for a lot of board and card games, do you think it was that environment that caused you to make games with deliberate choice and consequence, or do you believe it was the reverse, that your belief in choice and consequence as a mechanic sent you down that path of Steve Jackson Games?
I think that my experience playing Dungeons and Dragons and then working for Steve and then working at TSR on the D&D stuff, I think that absolutely shaped everything I've done. It's kind of pathetic when you say it out loud, but I have spent my entire career, 30 years, just trying to recapture that feeling I had in 1978, the first time I played D&D. That's a whole life summed up in trying to capture that feeling of telling stories with my friends. Yeah, absolutely, that's where it started.
Well, family seems to be a fairly persistent theme in a lot of your games. Considering your games generally teach players important skills, then let the players use those skills in their own way to manipulate that universe. Is that parental mindset like a conscious thing, or is it just something that you've arrived at by chance?
I wouldn't even know that it was there, except some guy was working on his master's degree and sent me a copy of his thesis, and I read it, and there were some things in there that I knew about. I mean, I'm very conscious about putting sort of altered states of reality into the games I work on. I think that's really cool and fun. And there's always a basketball court. I knew that, But the central part of this guy's thesis was that every game I've done has been about a dysfunctional family. And like, hey, mom, I mean, you were great, right? I mean, I came from a loving two-parent family. It was great. So I don't know where that comes from, but it really opened my eyes to the idea that my career has been just one long therapy session.
Well, and do you think that it does carry over into the way that you process the way you make games, as opposed to like, I mean, it's obviously a big theme in the games themselves, but in the actual your process as you go through making them?
You know, I have a very specific process, and I think I think a lot of what drives the games that I make and the way I make them comes from my family experience. I mean, I really am the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, I've been lucky in my career. I was lucky in my life. I mean, I came from an environment of like unconditional love, and I was always encouraged to express myself and not just listen to other people and take what they say at face value. I come from a very argumentative, let's just say, family. And so I think that's reflected in my games and certainly in my process. I mean, I want my teams telling me that I'm full of it, you know, on a regular basis. I want them pushing back. I never want anybody to buy into the game master, game god, legend nonsense. I mean, you need people pushing back and arguing. So like the heart of my culture, if you go look at the mission statements that I've written over the years, the culture I want in my studios and as part of my development process is what I call respectful argumentation. Nice. You know, that's greatness comes out of friction and tension and people fighting for what they believe in. Yeah. And that's what we do when we make the games. And that's what I hope players do when they play them. Just figure out what they think is right and go and do it and see what happens.
Well, actually, pursuant to that, I mean, your games often require the player to, I guess, impose their will on the universe. Being a self-confessed stubborn man, do you think that your own willfulness is the appeal of designing games that way?
You know, it's so funny because until this week, I never really thought about, you know, my ego and my stubbornness as part of what makes the games that I've worked on different or you know, interesting to me. But I actually think it is a weird part of what goes on. I was talking to someone the other day and just saying, you know, everybody I know in this business has a fairly enormous ego. You know, if you talk to Tim Schafer, he's not a shy guy. You know, Will Wright, not a shy guy. Sid Meier, everybody has this ego thing going. But the whole foundation of what I want to do in games is it's like putting my ego aside and letting players show off theirs. So, you know, maybe it's just I want to give everybody the experience that I have just being an egomaniac or something.
Well, look, with the recent furor surrounding the ending of Mass Effect 3 and the prevailing attitude of, I guess, entitlement by fans, at what point do you believe that any intellectual property ceases to be owned by the creator and transfers to the audience?
You know, it's interesting. The who owns a game is a really important thing to me. And just in terms of the kinds of games I make, I'm a big believer in it's the player's experience and it's the player's game. And you know, there are moments in my games where players do things that aren't expected, and they try things that even, you know, the developers, even I don't know if that'll work or not. They make plans and then they execute them and they work. That's magic. And you know, instead of fixing the places where players get to do things we don't expect, I celebrate them. You know, and I at least once on every project I have to tell my team, guys, once the player's playing, it's theirs. You don't own it anymore. It's theirs. And if they think it's fun to jump out of the world, and you know, if they think they think it's fun to take grenades and attach them to walls and create, you know, ladders out of them, and go for it. Just, you know, it's their game. Games should be about players finding their own fun in this playground that we create for them.
Well, coming from an appreciation of film and comic books, which are effectively passive mediums, I mean, how important do you think that level of interactivity is to defining gaming as its own medium?
There's nothing more important in games than that interactivity. There's nothing more important than players getting to decide how to interact with the worlds you create. Nothing at all. You know, like movies didn't become, you know, art, if you will, until they stopped imitating stage plays. And, you know, television didn't become art until it stopped imitating radio. And comic books became art, I would argue, when they started doing things that other media couldn't. Until we stop trying to be like movies and until we stop trying to be like linear media, we're just not doing our jobs, you know. There's absolutely nothing more important than players getting to see a problem, solve it the way they want, and then deal with the consequences of that decision.
Well, speaking of which as well, I mean, obviously there's a big push at the moment to conserve a lot of gaming's history. I mean, would you, my contention's always been that having Nolan Bushnell's first computer is as important as having Lumiere's first projector or first camera. Would you agree with something like that?
Absolutely. Hey man, I met Nolan Bushnell for the first time about 2 weeks ago. I mean, I was like, would you take my picture please with Mr. Bushnell, please? Can we take a picture? You know, I mean, it was awesome. And the thing is, I'm not ready to say that preserving, you know, Ralph Baer's first game machine is the same as you know, the first camera, or the, you know, I remember Trip Hawkins, the founder of EA, said that the PlayStation 2 was going to be as important in Western civilization as the creation of the printing press.
Yeah, that's Trip though.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that, but the fact is we don't know. Okay. In you know, 1592, no one knew that people were going to care about Shakespeare 600 years later. No one had a clue, you know. And no one had a clue in 1910 that D.W. Griffith creating the language of movies was going to be even something people remembered, let alone thought was important. No one knew. And similarly, you know, I gave a talk at Acme yesterday, and Shakespeare might have been sitting in the audience. You know, we don't know. I mean, the guys who created Fruit Ninja or Flight Control might be the greatest creative minds of you know, the 26th century. We don't know. And for that reason, and also because, I mean, all this digital stuff, it's just bits and bytes, right? We have to save it all, just on the off chance that what we're doing is important. Now, obviously, I think it is critically important, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, sorry.
We can always bin it later.
Yeah, you can't get it back once it's gone. You know, so now's the time to start preserving our history, just in case. In
your presentation yesterday, you said you were, when you started game design, you said you wanted to destroy those who'd been before you, and you're waiting for someone to come along and destroy. Now, obviously, you don't mean in the physical sense, but do you believe like such a cycle of kind of rebirth is important to the, I guess, continued success of games and game development?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important. It's every medium that happens. It's not just in games; it happens everywhere, right? I mean, in the '70s, a whole new group of filmmakers came along who'd been, you know, college educated. They went to USC, they went to UCLA, or they were reading Cahiers du Cinema, you know, in Paris, and they came along and just completely upended, you know, movies as art. And similarly, I absolutely felt it, and you know, they might not admit it, but my peers, we all used to talk about it all the time, like, oh, those old guys, you know, those guys at TSR, we're going to show them what it's all about, you know, or, you know, that guy over there making adventure games, how can he do that? Look, and can't he see that we're changing the world here? You know, you just, you know, the young want to destroy the old, and it's awesome. I mean, I really, really hope there's some kid out there who just knows how to do a conversation in a game in a way that I can't even imagine, or make me believe that I'm interacting with a real person or a real cartoon mouse, at least, you know? Just somewhere out there has to be someone with the idea that I can't even imagine.
People like John Carmack, for example, aren't big fans of designers. They believe that they're like unnecessary to the process. I mean, obviously you're very embracing of how people approach the way they make games. At what point do you think it's important that, I don't know, not necessarily even design, but what elements do you think are important to making a game a success, or telling the story, or you know, giving the experience that you want to deliver?
Well, John's just wrong, by the way. Just so we'll just move past that. You know, I think it really is just making sure you have a vision of something. I mean, you have to have something unique and interesting to say, or why bother saying it? You know. Having a vision and then being able to communicate it clearly to what is sadly an ever-growing number of people to realize that vision. I think it's just have something unique to say. If you're, okay, maybe I'm just speaking for myself now, actually, now that I'm just talking out loud here, but you know, one of the things that's incredibly important to me is to try to do something in every game that I don't know how to do, so there's this beautiful, scary chance of failure. You know, it'd be a lot easier if I just said, okay, I'm gonna make a game like X or a game like Y. But anybody at my studio will tell you, if you ever start out a pitch for a game or for a level or for a character that says, this is like this, I'm stopping you dead. No, I don't want to hear how it's like that other thing. You know, have something unique to say, and then be able to communicate it clearly, I think is the most important thing.
Well, speaking of communication, obviously management is probably one of the, I guess, underrated elements of video game design, or I guess creation in general. How has it been coming from teams of effectively you through to teams of hundreds of people? I mean, has it been hard learning the skills necessary to make that happen?
You know, hey, even when it was just one guy or 10 people sitting around making a game, it was hard. Making games is, I call it gruelingly hard work. It's just unbelievable. I've worked on films and I've written novels and written comic books, and making games is the hardest thing I can imagine doing. Man, if only I could just make movies for a living. Holy cow, wow, easy. Anyway, yeah, management has become an increasingly important part of the job. Like right now on Disney Epic Mickey, we actually totaled up all the names in the credits, and it's about 780 people. Yeah, rolling your eyes is exactly the right thing to do. That's what I do all the time. It's like I look at my studio director now and just say, where did all this money go? I mean, I literally spend as much in a day as I spent on my first game. That's incredible to me. And it is a very different skill set. Is it hard? Absolutely. Is it as much fun as actually, making a game? No, not really. But it's necessary. I mean, as the hardware becomes more capable, and as gamers become more demanding, and as people expect things to look like Pixar films rendered in real time, but with interactivity, you kind of have to deliver on people's expectations.
Well, that actually goes to my next question. With this shift towards, say, independent gaming, like indie development, do you believe that it's more difficult now because we have an expectation where previously, when one person made a game in their basement or whatever the case may be, there was no expectation on what was coming out. Nowadays, as you say, they're expecting these beautifully rendered, well-conceived worlds, when it's two guys effectively making it for an iPhone.
I actually think in the AAA game space, which is kind of where I've played for the last 25 years or so, I think there is that expectation, and things have become different and harder. Okay, just because you're spending so much more money and there's so many more people depending on you. I mean, there were 34 of us, including testers, on Deus Ex. Okay, you feel a sense of responsibility there because there are 34 jobs on the line and 34 families. Now, when there are 160 plus people at Junction Point, plus all those other people at studios around the world helping us, there's certainly a lot more responsibility. But here's where I disagree with you. Yeah. We're at a point now where you don't have to make AAA games. 10 years ago, if you wanted to make a game, that was it. It was the only game in town. Now, John Blow can make a game, with a contract artist and a contract audio guy. Yeah. And Braid comes out. Chris Hecker can work by himself and make a spy party game that he's been bending my ear about for the last 15 years. Notch can change the world in Scandinavia without ever talking to a publisher. So I think there are just so many ways to reach an audience with so many different kinds of games that it really is kind of a golden age for gaming right now. It may be a little tougher in my part of the world, but Tim Fitzrandolph at Disney made Where's My Water with like 6 guys, and that game it's hugely successful. So I'm really encouraged by that. I think creativity is everywhere now in games in a way that it wasn't even 10 years ago.
Well, there's been a lot of terminology developed by designers, I guess, out of necessity. I mean, are there any terms or phrases unique to gaming development that you find valuable, or if any at all, is just like talking straight, I guess?
You want to know what the biggest problem is in gaming? The biggest problem? We don't have a shared vocabulary. I've been arguing about this and screaming about it at game developers conferences since 1991, and we're no better off now. I mean, when I say designer, I literally mean something different than the guys at Avalanche, another Disney studio. They say designer and they mean something, and I say designer, the same word means something completely different. I say producer, and I mean something completely different than EA means when they say producer, And when you come to my studio, you have to learn a whole new vocabulary. When I say, what happens when I frob that? Does that mean anything to you? Where are my flinders? That has to flinderize, Have you scupped your code yet? Every studio has its own language, which makes education, training, communication, working in, at different studios. It's like impossible. It's like I speak English and I have to talk to a designer who speaks Swahili or something. It's crazy. So we have to fix that. We just have to fix it.
Look, I think we'll leave it there. Warren, thank you very much for your time.
Hey, my pleasure.
Been an absolute
Thanks.
pleasure.